everybody. I know this is towards the end of Springboard. I always get sad at the end of things. Some people love to go home and feeling tired. I always get sad. I like the networking. I love the energy. And I'm really thrilled to be doing this session for everyone. My name is Alesia Visconti. I am the CEO and president of FranServe. FranServe is the largest broker network. And I was asked to do this panel because the question of, when should a brand come into a broker group, or when should they just stay organic? We get asked this about, 1,000 times a day, right? Because we work with so many brands. And I'm going to introduce my panel in just a second, but I just want to go over a couple of little housekeeping rules when it comes to brokers. There are groups that call themselves brokers. We call ourselves consultants, and there's other groups that say coaches. It's all going to be the same thing, but for today, I'm going to say brokers so that we're all on the same page. But that's one of the confusions when you start talking about when to join a group. Is it a broker group, a coaching? Is it consultant? So it's a little confusing just right off the bat. So what I'm going to do is when I introduce my panel, I'm going to have them just say their name, the brand that they're with, how many units they have open, and how long they've been in franchise. And I'll start that off by saying again, Alesia Visconti with FranServe. We have probably somewhere around the 600, maybe 650, 700 brokers. We have 800 brands in our portfolio. And I've been in franchising for 10 years, started as a broker with FranServe, became the CEO. After 2 years, I bought the company. So I am a big fan of what brokers can do for brands. I would say about half of our portfolio is emerging brands. So very passionate about that, love to see it. So I'm just going to start here with Michael and let him chat a little bit about his, and then we'll get into the questions.
My name is Michael Valente. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Renovation. We have 45 locations across 23 states, and I've been in franchising for the past 3 years.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Losco. I'm the Chief Development Officer for WellBiz Brands. We're a portfolio company. We have 5 brands under the parent company: Dry Bar, Radiant Waxing, Elements Massage, Fitness Together, and we have about 850 locations open, 300 in development. We're also expanding internationally. We have 6 countries signed and 6 units open in the UK.
Hi, everybody. I'm Neal, Courtney. I'm probably the longest tenured in here. I'm 23 years in franchising, next to maybe Red over there. I started my career with Famous Brands International, parent company to Great American Cookie, Mrs. Fields, TCBY, and a couple pretzel brands. Was the CEO there for a few years, left there and bought a concept called Cookie Cutters Haircuts for Kids, where my wife was actually a franchisee, multi-unit franchisee. We ended up buying that brand in 2014 with 20 units. We quickly grew that brand to close to 110 pre-COVID, and in 1 year opened 48 stores in 52 weeks. And a lot of that came through the strategic use of brokers. So happy to be here, happy to share, and thanks for having me.
Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. My name's Aaron Harper. I'm the CEO of Rolling Suds. We're a national residential and commercial power washing franchise emerging brand. But I've been in franchising since 2017. And all in the residential and commercial services space. We have 44 locations in 12 states across 15 franchisees since February. We've got 18 open. We'll open another 9 in November, and then we'll open about 15 per month in the first 4 months of the year. And then in the last 2 brands that I've been involved in, one was all organic, and we did about 200 deals in 3 years. And then the last brand that I worked on prior to it was a brand called the Patch Boys, and we did 223 deals in 24 months. And that was predominantly almost all brokers and almost all with Alesia and her team. So that's my background.
I promise there's no plants here. These guys are selected. That's true. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with like the question that we always get the most and what might be in your minds. As we go through, if there's questions that you think of or that you want, the panel to address, we're pretty transparent up here. So I'm going to start with Michael and go down the line and come up. Michael, when do you think it's the best time to reach out for a brand, for a broker group? Is it at the very beginning, a certain number, 3, 4, 10, never? What do you feel? What's your gut on that?
Well, I think it depends on the brand, right, and what the growth goals are for that brand. When we started out, we didn't have any units, and we've done almost 90% of our placements with the broker groups now, but we also didn't have any constraints on our footprint. We wanted to go national, we wanted to go big, we wanted to go fast, and we kind of realized early on that reaching that broker group was the way to do it. If you don't have those plans, or you maybe have a restaurant concept that's regional and you have to grow slowly, it may not be the best time to reach out to the broker group. So I think definitely looking at what your growth plans are will help you decide which way to go and when to reach out to them.
Thank you. And I'm just going to have you go down the line, gentlemen.
Sounds good. I would say early and often. There's ebbs and flows with lead generation. So whether it's organic growth or broker growth, knowing the networks, knowing those that are affiliated with the networks, and making sure that you have presence and understanding that they're there as a lifeline when needed. You can always reach out, and maybe it's not the right time to join or utilize the network, but certainly knowing them is an important aspect of growing.
Great. In my personal opinion, I think a lot of it depends. I think it depends on where you are from a cash flow perspective. I think it's really important that you get a good idea of your 3-year plan and essentially what your growth rate should be and can be, because when you utilize the brokerage networks, you cannot rely on your franchise fees really to fund anything. A lot of the franchise fees go towards paying either the FSOs or the brokers. But with that being said, all things being equal, franchise fees should never really be used as a source of funding franchise operations anyway. Whether you go down any lead gen source, and if you have an internal team or you rely on organic, there is an inherent cost to serve. And whether you use brokers or whether you do organic, ironically, it tends to cost about the same. So I think speed to market, making sure that you have solid financials. If you have an item 19, it helps a lot when you reach out to the broker networks. Makes it a lot easier for them to sell. And then having the right economics, your IFF has to be in the right place to be able to offer the right commissions, because they say it's not about the money, but it is about the money. So you have to have the resources to be able to incentivize, but not getting it too far out of balance so that your costs for the franchisees are too high versus what the absolute costs to get in are. So they've got to be proportional. So ultimately, it just depends on what your strategy is and what your capital structure looks like. But I've seen so many emerging brands get themselves in way too deep in a really quick amount of time, say 12 months, because they thought they would have franchise stores open, and they don't, and they need royalties, and all their franchise fees have gone towards lead gen, and then all of a sudden you're looking for capital at a time when it's really tough to get capital. So I think having a really solid 3-year plan, understanding your financials, and how to allocate to get to the point where you can become royalty sufficient is really important.
Yeah, and I would echo that you need to back into what your specific goals are for growth and how much it's going to cost you to get those units open. And what I can share in my experience is with the first brand that I worked on, it was all organic. I was fielding somewhere between 220 to 250 leads a month, and that took up, it's more than a full-time job. So it just depends on your human capital as well. The other thing I would say, with the last brand that I worked on, it was pretty much all brokers. If you plan on joining a broker network and not allocating the time to develop resources, you might as well just to develop relationships, you might as well just light money on fire. It does not make sense to join a broker network and not do outreach to consultants and I talk to emerging brands all the time, and they say, I joined 5 broker networks and I'm not getting any leads. And I'm like, well, how many calls are you making outreach to develop relationships with brokers per month? And they're like, well, I did the webinar once a month. It's like, that's not what you have to do. When I started working with the last brand, there weren't many consultants that would still work with the brand as a result of the behavior of the former owner of that company. And so I called all of them, any person who had ever integrated in, or excuse me, anyone who had ever interacted with the brand in the broker community, I called them. And I reached out, and it was cold calls, guys. I didn't know any of them. I didn't know how to work with brokers. And it took like probably 6 months before I started getting some serious introductions, and I was fighting an uphill battle. And so what I would say is, like, pick 1 or 2 and then allocate the amount of time that you need to do that. And it's just about what the value of your time is, whether it's fielding leads that are organic and, you know, going through that process, or spending the time developing relationships with brokers. And I'll say this one last thing. What I realized is that I, as a human, can only allocate and field realistically like 200 to 250 leads a month if I'm doing nothing else. And if I have 20 brokers that trust me and trust my brand and trust my integrity and trust who I am and trust that I can get units sold and open, and they each field 200 leads per month, well, my leverage is higher at that point. Now I'm accessing, you know, if I'm the top 5, if I'm the top home service brand in their portfolio, let's just say, and they each field, what's that math, 4,000 people, something like that. So that's what I learned, and that's why I spend my time doing that, because I don't have time to do as much organic.
Super, thank you very much, gentlemen. I started with that question because, number one, most people when they come to a webinar or a workshop rather, they want the answer, right? The silver bullet. Like, when is the time? Like, right, just fill that blank out right now. It's 3 units, and it's when you earned it. And you hear from each individual, it depends, I feel it's this way, you have to look at this. And I just want to be clear that there is no silver bullet, right? Whether you're working with brokers, you're working organically, right? It's an effort to grow your business. And as each gentleman said, you have to put the time into it. We have brands that come in, and they're like, I joined, and like, I just expect to have new franchisees, you know, raining down from the sky. And, you know, you have to remember, I started as a broker, so I know how it works. And it is developing a relationship, right? The broker is bringing a candidate to you for you to look at that they think is a good fit for you. So there has to be a certain amount of trust and rapport from the broker to the brand, because the broker has either spent money or time to get that lead. And now they have to trust to turn it over to you. The reason I do not like the word broker is because we don't broker the deal. We don't get contracts signed. We don't accept money. You guys do. The brand does. So that trust has to be there, that I have this great candidate and I'm going to turn it over to you. You have to build the trust ahead of time to get that kind of relationship. And I can tell you, as God's honest witness, I almost didn't come on board as a consultant because I always said, I know I can close. I didn't know if you guys could close, right? It was scary for me to turn my livelihood and my future over to someone. So it's a very symbiotic relationship between brokers and brands and all of you, right? So I just want to understand that. And for anybody who doesn't know what a broker or how that relationship works, gentlemen, can you just take that in a sentence or two? Aaron, go ahead. You can go first.
Yeah, so a broker or a broker network is a lead source for you. I talk to emerging franchisors sometimes, and oftentimes they think like, well, the broker is going to close deals for me. Brokers are a lead source, and they're only as good as you give them the ability to be good. They need to understand your brand enough to present it. It's also, it is a relationship. It is a mutual understanding, and they do have to trust that you're going to be able to convert that, and also, depending on the broker, get the unit open.
I love the comparison to just using relationship as a key component. As you go out and look at different broker networks, that relationship that you build with either the FranServes or the FranNets or whomever it's going to be, having that symbiotic, very synergistic relationship, they call it within the industry frickin' frack. So the leads come in, and then it's up to us as the franchisors to close those deals and work very closely in very close communication with those brokers to make sure that we're all on the same page. But it's very much a team effort. But it's a strong lead source. But at the end of the day, the relationship that you have with that broker network and those individual brokers go a long way. And it also helps you within that overall network as you build relationships with individual brokers. Word gets around that, hey, Neal, Courtney, or whomever, they're really good at closing these deals, so put this company up high on your list. Not only do they perform, but they can get the deals done. So having those communications, the meetings, just the understanding of the brand, and I think over-communication is a key thing with building those relationships with the broker networks.
Yeah, well said, gentlemen. I would just add that the FaceTime is important as well. Most of the broker and consultant networks host annual regional conferences. Attending those conferences, spending the time with the brokers, making sure you have that FaceTime. It's one thing to trade an email, a phone call, a video call, but that face-to-face interaction goes a long way.
I think the brokers, but back to the consultant side of this, right? Like what they do really well is they deliver high quality potential candidates to us versus maybe organic. The close rate on broker leads are always a lot higher than they are on the organic side. I think another thing that they really do well is fear management. You know, when people want to become entrepreneurs, they don't really understand what it means to become entrepreneurs. And I was always coached the FSOs that we work with. They're in the business of managing fear, right? People get real scared. And if they don't have proper education, if they don't have proper fear management, you know, you could lose that potential candidate. So as the consultant side, not just the broker, as the coach side, that's a lot of what the brokers do. They help with managing that fear. It's really important. And how many deals get blown up at the 1 yard line because of fear? I'd say a lot of them.
That's a great point. Thank you for that, because I used to joke that I earn my money in the last 15 minutes of the placement, right? Because that's when, you know, all the emotions are high for a candidate, right? So, I want to talk a little bit about organic, right? Because a lot of times I had the panel go first because people think that I'm a little biased, which I probably am, right? Because I work in the broker networks, but. I don't believe that there's one or the other. I think that the sign outside said that, something like, should it be, brokers or, I definitely don't think it's mutually exclusive, right? These are your businesses. You're going to get interested parties from both. You're going to have consultants that are going to bring you qualified leads. You're going to get things from websites or portals or however else you're getting them. And the difference is, what will work better for your brand. It doesn't have to be either or, it can be and. That's really what I would say. And I want the panel to talk a little bit about what the benefits are in working organically, and then we'll address the consultant side. But I don't want you to feel that, okay, I can just throw everything out organically, because if you're in a growth stage, you don't put your eggs in one basket. So, Michael, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, we put all our eggs in one basket, so we mainly use the consultants, the coaches, and the brokers. So we don't have a well-developed organic strategy. Not that we haven't thought about it. It's just we kind of started with the FSOs and the broker networks early, and that's been our horse, and we've had explosive growth on it. So, but one thing that the benefit of organic is you get to bring in those fees, right? Because the franchise fees that come in stay in-house, so you get to keep a lot more of the fees inside. But I would say, unless you have a well-developed in-house strategy to manage those leads from the organic side, right? And the close rate on organic may be under 5%, where the close rate with the broker is somewhere between 10 and 15%, and you can verify that with me, but it's a lot lower, right? So you have to have an infrastructure to be able to handle that organic side. So you keep the fees, but it stresses out your infrastructure a little bit more, because you have to be able to shepherd that candidate who may have fear to the closing, and that may be more difficult.
Thanks, Michael. I would say there's a lot of franchisors that have a healthy balance between brokers and organic. The organic side of the business, especially as founders, I know a lot of you are in the room, the rapport that you can have bringing a lead from infancy to close alleviates a lot of those jitters on both sides, for the franchisee and for the franchisor, because you're entering into a 10-year relationship with that person. So you want to make sure that they're a good fit for you, and likewise, you're a good fit for them. Organically, I see that work incredibly well.
So I think as you grow, the hybrid approach becomes stronger, especially as you reach 100 units. The best sales tools, sales opportunity out there are your existing franchisees and your existing store base. We get a lot of lead generation from customers that have been in and experienced time in our stores. So you have to have a place for them to go. So having a strong website, having a separate Fran Dev website, utilizing Google Ads, Facebook ads, LinkedIn, just content management. But I think any way you can drive traffic, especially if you have that existing base of stores across the country, you need a place for leads to come and apply, and then having a team to follow up. And a lot of the leads can be filtered out through the application process that you internally create, making it a little bit more sustainable for your internal team. And the quality of the lead is much better. So that application process, being very clear on what the requirements are to become a franchisee. And then again, having a strong item 19 has a huge benefit as you filter through, and if you can use some of those numbers in your organic strategies, it helps out a lot. So.
Excuse me. Yeah, this is all good stuff. So what I do on the organic side is we're doing a push towards top of the funnel content. So putting out video content and going on podcasts and things that, cost a limited amount of money to set the expectation, really kind of like on all social media channels as to exactly the type of buyer we're looking for. I know, the exact avatar of the buyer that's going to be successful in my system, and so I spend my time and money focused on that specific buyer. The other thing, I think, just to touch upon the broker side, there is a broker side element to top of the funnel stuff that also needs to happen. And it's not only communication about your brand to the brokers, it's communication about who will be successful in your brand. And as an emerging franchisor, if your model or you don't have the capital to take on absentee or semi-absentee, and someone tells you should, run the opposite direction. You need to find the right people who are going to be successful in your system, and so you have to know who that person is and how to target that person. And I think that goes for both organic and broker.
Super. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We get asked quite a bit, like, what do I need to do as a brand to work well with brokers? And you heard some of it up on this panel, but I want to go a little bit more into detail. For a number of years with Springboard, I was on a panel for the item 19, how to turn your item 19 into a sales tool. And I was on that panel with, attorneys and people who knew much more about item 19 than I did. But the reality is, I know from a broker side that if by law, you don't have to have an item 19, but many, many, many brokers will not want to work with you if you do not have an item 19. So if you don't have one and you're racing into all the broker networks and spending a lot of money going to all these conventions and you're wondering why nothing's happening and you don't have an item 19, that's what you got to start to look at. All right, and again, it's not every broker, it's not every broker network, it's not a group thing, it's very individual. But being honest, and having been a broker, I can tell you that is something that is a real consideration for someone to want to represent your brand. The other thing you have to think about, and then I'm going to let the gentlemen share their experiences, is, we teach our brokers, and I'm sure the other networks do as well, that, you guys are our clients, right? The candidates are not our clients. Right? The candidates are people that the brokers work with for very intense, but typically for a short period of time, right? Until they either decide to, become a Z or, step off the boat, right? They're done. But you brands are our clients. That is where the relationship goes on for years and years, and another candidate and another candidate and another candidate. So that's why it's really important when you're coming into a broker network to understand it's got to be mutual respect. It's got to be, you building your team of brokers that are going to want to represent you, doing the right things at the right time, right? Something is simple, and I know it, but when they turn over a lead, and then you wait 2 days to call them, okay? And I know it happens. I shop my brands, right? I secret shop my brands. So when that happens, it's hard to make up that trust, right? They just are all excited, and you're excited, and then you're not excited, right? And so I would like the gentleman to talk a little bit about, some of the best practices, or maybe one of the worst practices of what they've seen or their experience to help all of you.
I guess I'll go. When dealing with the brokers, I think it's important to understand that anything you're doing in this business is we're selling, right? We're selling dreams, we're selling our companies. So to me, forward-facing marketing is really important. The broker networks are looking at, how many brands you guys have? I mean, hundreds of brands, right? And they have a candidate, and they have to give that candidate 5 brands. How are you going to make your brand stand out? So using your item 19 as a marketing tool to show high net revenue, and then also all the materials and the forward-facing videos that you have, I think is really important to distinguish yourself so that the brokers pay attention to you. The other thing that I think is important is if you are going to deal with brokers, and especially if you don't have much experience, using a franchise sales organization, FSO, is important. We're all in the relationship business. This conference is a testament to that. Everybody's here making relationships. Deals get done with friends. So you have to be friendly, you have to create that relationship with the broker so they trust and know that the lead that they have is going to go to a quality place and a quality home with your brand.
Yeah, Michael, I couldn't agree more. The relationship aspect of it is crucial. Developing, maintaining that relationship, and then making sure that you provide a nurturing aspect to it to create what I would consider a differentiation between you and other similar brands that are within that broker consultant's portfolio.
I think the number one aspect at the end of the day, and I think Dave Barr nailed it yesterday if you saw his keynote, is that it all comes down to franchisee profitability. You've got to have your house in order. And the first 20 franchise locations you open up, you've got to make sure that they're making money, and they're going to validate for you, whether it's through a P&L or whether it's verbally. But having the financial performance in place, because at the end of the day, it's all about return on invested capital. So just understanding your numbers, getting your new franchisees to profitability, and then using that as the maximized tool for growth, whether that be through organic or be through brokers. The more profitable your brand is, the more units you're going to sell, regardless of the avenue you go down. So just number one focus on, especially your first 20 units, should be on franchisee performance and profitability.
So for me, what really works is understanding what brands the broker is excited about and what brands they've had success presenting in the past. It allows me to not waste their time. Like if they really love food and beverage and 4 walls and like that's what they're presenting, maybe my brand's not the right one for them. If they're selling restoration and carpet cleaning and they have success with home service brands, well, now there's maybe some more synergy. But I think in my experience with consultants specifically in terms of best practices, it's listening. I find that a lot of brands that I talk to, and I come to these things, guys, just to give free advice to emerging franchisors, by the way. That's like one of my favorite things to do when I'm here. So one of the things that I've seen is like, well, I joined this network and I'm calling all these brokers and I told them all about my brand and like the size of my industry and how much it's growing each year and all this stuff. And it's like that matters very, very little. What matters is what they're looking for and the relationship that you establish with them to make sure that it's going to be a symbiotic relationship. And then, I've had consultants tell me that, Aaron, like, it doesn't matter what brand you're involved in. I know that you're going to treat them well and that you're going to get the deal closed and that it's very high likelihood. And, I'll present whatever you want me to present. But that took years of developing trust. And so I just would urge you that if you do join broker networks, be patient. It's going to take some time. Spend the time, allocate the time. If you can't allocate the time, hire someone that can allocate the time. And so that's just been what's worked for me.
Thank you. I also want to just talk briefly about validation, and I'm not going to go into it in detail, but emerging brands are unique because when a consultant is going to have a candidate come over to you and you don't have 100 units open, your validation is going to be different. Sometimes you have one or two, sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's the CEO, the founder, right, who's validating. So I really would encourage you to be as transparent with the broker as you can. In other words, don't try to put on airs like we're bigger than we are, or we've got all of this handled if you don't, because trust me, my people will see through that. And then that breaks the trust. And I've seen many, many emerging brands do that, right? They want to play their hand to the brokers, and then the brokers don't really feel like we're building an honest trust. They'd much rather you say, I'm new at this, I'm not sure how to go about this, I want to build a relationship, what can I do to help you, right? You'll get all my brokers to stand up for you, right? So that's the kind of thing in terms of when we're talking about transparency and building relationship, and these guys are pros at that, right? So I just want to say that because I've seen that a lot. They want to, not sure, they get nervous with validation. Most brokers, my group is trained on how to work with validation with emerging brands because it's unique, right? You don't have 100 brands. So, I know that there's like zero, but we're going to make believe that there's some drawbacks to working with the broker network, right? So there is, right? And it's not for everyone. At times we have brands go in, come out, go back in, depending on what's going on with them. So I want the panel to be candid, right? I love, brutal honesty and transparency about, where you think some of the drawbacks or some of the problems can be, right? Let's educate the group. So I'm not sure which way I went last. I apologize. Who's up?
You want me to start?
All right.
So some of the drawbacks are you could potentially be getting the wrong leads, the wrong types of buyers. And so I think the amount of time that it takes to develop that relationship and set those expectations on the front end. The other thing is you need to have a lot of capital. If you're going to use brokers, you heard David Barr say, there's the value gap. You've got to have a lot of money to get these units open, and you have no royalties coming in. And so if you're working with brokers and you've never worked with brokers before, and then you need to have a lot of capital to support and get those franchisees open. And I think working backwards from how much does it cost me to get a unit open, and then how much is it going to cost me to sell this unit, and what you'll find is that using brokers, you might be losing money. And that's a hard pill to swallow, especially if you hire like an FSO. You're probably losing money on franchise fees, and so the amount of capital necessary to get the amount of units open is something to consider before you start working with consultants. A couple things just that you could potentially do is create other corporate units or have your friends and family go open those corporate units. As franchisees, or you create one and then you sell that to someone you trust, and now you have your first franchise location. You already know the operations of your business better than anyone, and now you've got existing validation that can help you when you start selling franchises, and you've got additional cash flow and built-in royalties from doing that. So that's a kind of an idea. Since we launched in February, 8 of our units, one came from an employee referral internally on the corporate side. And then another one came from a franchisee referral. And I pay employees a referral fee, and I pay franchisees a referral fee. And so, I think there's other stuff that's a little bit outside the box that you can do for organic as well that's just not paying for leads. So those are just some thoughts I have.
Great point. And again, the financing component and understanding the true cost of franchising, it's sometimes a tough pill to swallow, but there's a lot of consultants out there, not brokers, but that will say, hey, for $100,000, you can get your company and you can franchise it. I can tell you $2 million later, you're probably going to have 50 units and looking for more capital because of that time it takes to sell and to open. From selling a location to opening is typically 9 to 10 months. That's a long time to float support. And like Dave said yesterday, 80% of your support is happening in those first 9 months. So it's very expensive to build that infrastructure and then sustain it through that growth part of the franchising. I think in the last 12 years, there's been hyperinflation in broker networks, right? I mean, how many brokers in the last 10 years? What's the increase? Michael, you know the industry well. Yeah, it's by far over the last 12 years become one of the best lead generation tools out there. With it, it's created a lot of inflation with initial franchise fees because the brokers and the FSOs need to be paid, and there needs to be a little left over for the franchisors. So where 10, 15 years ago, you're seeing initial franchise fees of $20,000 to $25,000, which equated to maybe 30% of the overall investment. You're now seeing franchise fees up at $50,000, $60,000 for brands that only have a few units open. So I think there's been a disproportional increase in franchise fees that has to kind of be looked at. But again, it's a very complicated equation. But there's definitely, that's been one of the downsides, I think, of seeing the hyper growth within the broker networks is it's impacting our franchisees, their initial investment up front, because those initial fees have to be higher because the commissions have to be there. One, to get the brokers paid, but two, to incentivize them to show your brand.
I think Aaron and Neal covered it extremely well. There's certainly a cost associated with working with broker networks, and that depends if you're working with one or 5 or 6. There's quite a few networks out there. We do work with 6 networks, and yes, it is expensive. It's expensive on the upfront costs. It's expensive on the conference attendance, and it's expensive on the commission side. Or the broker fees, I should say. That said, the other drawback that I would add is the brand knowledge. And as founders, as emerging brands, you have the intimate brand knowledge of what you've created, and sometimes that isn't always passed through to the brokers and the consultants. So knowing your brand inside and out, and not being able to convey all of that, and the brokers not necessarily picking up on all the nuances that you have, would be another drawback that I would point out.
The fee side was covered on it. I think that's one of the largest drawbacks is the fees, and it's not just the fees to be with the brokers, it's additional fees to travel to their conferences. They have racking fees, additional territory, aggregate fees. There's lots of fees associated with them. But that's been covered. I think one thing, just so you guys understand, is just because you sign up with a broker network does not mean you're going to do a deal with them. Right? And I think that's a myth, and I've seen a gentleman who's not at this conference, and we won't name his name, but he's been working the broker circuit for like 2 years and can't get but he's been doing it himself. And he's paid the fees, and he can't get his business picked up. And part of it is probably because he's doing it himself. But just because you enter a network, it doesn't mean you're going to do deals. And the final piece of this is you have to be strategic about what networks you enter and when. Because they all have different fees, they all have different fees up front. Some are better than others, and so you can't be a member of all organizations right off the bat. It took us a couple years to get into 6 or 7, which we are now, but we strategically chose which one we wanted to work with first, and then as we grew, we added others.
Do you want to say something, Aaron? Did you?
I was just going to say that once you start working deals in the broker network, it's also like the amount of communication required to keep those interactions and keep those relationships. And then when you get bad leads from brokers that you've established a relationship with, it's being able to communicate why that person wasn't the right fit early on in the process rather than trying to get them down to discovery day and then turning them away, because that's a real good way to make a broker not recommend your brand ever again. So I think just communicating and really managing those relationships in a way that's like meaningful and authentic would be, to me, it's a positive because I enjoy that, but I think it can be perceived as a negative, just the amount of time and also just its constant expectation setting and resetting, which is pretty nuanced.
Great, thank you, gentlemen. And oh, I'm sorry, please, go ahead, Neal.
Just some personal experience, and with emerging brands, how many people would rather do a multi-unit deal than a single unit deal in this room? Honestly. Right? Almost everybody, right? 3 packs, 4 packs, 5 packs. And I was the exact same way, right? And we did a lot of multi-unit deals pre-COVID. And those multi-unit deals are usually you do a 3-pack and then you give them an amount of time and a territory to open those stores. One thing that we ran into is we sold all these multi-unit deals and COVID hit. And it shut everything down, especially if you were in the service industry. In California, we couldn't open for 8 months. So all of a sudden, I've got franchisees calling me. One, they've got PTSD from COVID, and they've got 2 more units that they paid for but are not open yet. And they're saying, hey, can I get my money back? Well, what's the answer to that question? Sorry, I can't. I don't have the money, right? So then it becomes this just management and communication, but just be very aware of that multi-unit deal. We all want stores on the board. We all want these sold but not open, but it's a very dangerous and slippery slope if you get caught at the wrong time. And you get those franchisees that might not be performing, and they'll be calling you saying, hey, I can't do the 3-pack. What do I do? And you have to be on the other end and say, sorry about that. You signed up for 3, and now we're going to have to sell your territory or take it away from you. So just be prepared and think about those conversations before you get those deals done, because I can tell you from experience, you never know what's around the corner, and when these things do hit, they're tough conversations to manage through.
Thank you very much. You know, sometimes when I do a panel like this, I get asked, why do I point out like negative things about a broker group? Like it almost seems anti, what I stand for. But the reality is I stand for franchising. I stand for success. I have a big passion for emerging brands. We see brands, and you heard it, I think it was David Barr who did it, right? 250 come in a year and 250 go out a year, right? So my job is not, to just run up, broker deals. It's to help brands be successful. So I like pointing out the negativity or the downside. I don't want to say negativity, but the downside, because it might not be ready for you at this time, which leads me to my next point, and that is don't be offended if we turn you down. FranServe definitely turns brands down who comes to us, and it doesn't mean we don't like your model or think you can be successful, but sometimes we just see it's not the right time. You don't have the infrastructure. You're answering the phones, you're trying to do discovery day, you're doing territory checks, you're cleaning out the toilets, you're doing the marketing, and we know that if you come into the portfolio then, your reputation is not going to grow. Right? It's going to go the opposite. So we'd rather wait a little bit, and we'll tell you that. So it goes both ways is really what I'm trying to say. So please don't take it like, oh, she told me our business was bad. No, I'm saying the timing is not right for you, and I really honestly mean that. So now that I got that out of the way, let's talk about some of the positive things about working with the broker networks and why you've added that, considering, the biggest drawback typically is an expense. Right? It's, cost of acquisition and all of that, and you have to figure it out if it works. But I know when I was a broker and people would say, I want to own a business, we would say, all right, what do you want? Well, I don't know, my cousin Susie says this is a good brand, right? They have no idea. They're just driving down the road, they see something, they don't know, and that's really the benefit, right, of working with the brokers. Typically, they're going to bring you someone that you would not have looked at. Right, so that it's why typically you don't see great big. I don't know. We have Wendy's. We have big names, but typically you don't see that because they don't need the broker push. Right, they have televisions up the yin yang. Right, so I'd like the panel to talk a little bit about what they see for their brand. Right, and why they continue to spend the money and the effort of going to conventions, sponsoring them, reaching out. It's a part of your marketing spend. So, gentlemen, if you can take that away.
Yeah, constant quality lead flow and constant deal flow is what works for us. And we have great human beings that are in our system, and they came from the broker network and the consultants that we work with that give us constant quality leads. And I think that's most important, right? So that would be the number one thing I say.
Certainly quality leads. The leads turn into some of those multi-unit deals that Neal was talking about. Not only multi-unit, but for us, multi-brand as well, which is incredibly important to growing our portfolio. But you can spend as much as you want on FranDev marketing, and I can promise you, you will never reach the clientele that the broker networks have. So I would say between that and the high conversion rate, and we could talk about conversion ratios all day, but organic versus broker, you're talking a couple percent on the organic side, a ton of work for your internal team versus, a high double digit on brokers, 70-75% lead to sale conversion ratios. So those would be my positives for all of the broker networks out there.
Yeah, I completely agree. When I took Cookie Cutters over in 2014, we had 20 units and I had 6. And we sat around trying to figure out what's our fastest road to 70, because that's where we figured out where we were going to be royalty sufficient. And I quadrupled down on FSO and the broker networks. And within a 4-year period, we sold 280 units. And like I said, in 2018, we opened 48 units in 52 weeks. And I think 95% of our deals came through the broker networks and 5% were organic. So there was no doubt that the broker networks fueled our fire, and we caught fire within a couple broker networks, and it fueled our growth. So I think I'm a huge fan, especially quality of lead. And then just if you want to expedite growth and you've got a great business model, it's a great way to go.
I agree with everything that you guys have said, so I won't repeat it. The thing that I'll add to it is it's fun. Like, it's more fun for me to work with brokers than doing it on my own. Some of my best friends in the industry are brokers. Like, we talk. I have brokers that in the networks that I'm part of that I talk to monthly, and I've never closed a deal with them because we're friends. Like, my favorite conference that I go to every year is a broker conference because I just get to go hang out with all my friends.
It's because it's in Disney and you hang out.
And it's because it's in Disney.
I know the reality.
Yeah. So it's more fun. Like, to be honest with you guys, like, I'd rather talk to 15 brokers who I trust and know my kids' names than dial 250 leads a month.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate that as well. And we have time. I'm going to open it up for questions in just a moment, but I'd like to kind of wrap up this segment, if you don't mind, with some knowledge, right? We've been talking a lot about brokers and organic leads, and we can stay in that vein, but we have a lot of emerging brands, and I'd love you to share some wisdom either in that vein or another vein that you would want to pass on some of that knowledge.
I think just with knowing what you're good at and outsourcing what you're not. As founders and CEOs, we have a lot of things that we have to handle, a lot of things that come across our plate, and I think a constraint to growth is trying to do everything. So offloading and outsourcing things that you're not good at, bringing in the professionals, that was really the stance we took when we started out. I don't know what I don't know, so I'm going to work with the people who are the best that know that and just partner with them.
Thanks, Michael. There was a lot of talk today about initial franchise fees and how they relate to your business. As emerging brands, I know it's enticing to capture that revenue, recognize it as revenue, but I would challenge you not to use it as revenue and not to allocate it that way. As a franchisor, your enterprise value is derived from royalty revenue. So the key is open units. Use that initial franchise fee to pay the broker networks, boost up your SEM and SEO, optimize your website, pay an internal sales team so you have a healthy balance between brokers and organic lead flow. Your initial franchise fee, once all of those things are paid, whatever's left is going to be spread out or 606 across the lifetime of the franchise agreement. So I would definitely challenge you not to focus on that as revenue.
Just one thing on that, we're in the royalty business, not the fee business. I was taught that literally on day one. So just
Good point.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then second to that, when you start relying on franchise fees and those checks, you start making bad decisions with maybe letting some people into your system that shouldn't be in because you want that check. So with that being said, I'm going to reiterate again, I think the number one thing is franchisors. You've got to monitor and maximize franchisee profitability. I think that cures so many ills and will help expedite growth. And as David said yesterday too, When you get to 100 and 120 units, most of your growth should be coming from your original franchisees opening incremental units. And if they're not, there's a problem in the system. So again, franchisee profitability should be your number one priority once the franchisees get up and going, and making sure that's being maximized.
So my advice is whatever the amount of money you think you need it is to scale is going to be a lot more than that. Like a considerable amount more than that. So if you haven't modeled out what 5 years look like if you sell a certain number of units and you have a certain amount of staff in place, I would do that before you do anything else.
Great, and I'm going to add 2 cents, and then we'll open it up to questions. But I'm going to give a little bit of advice from my perspective. So one of them is going to sound, again, like I'm playing devil's advocate for my brokers, whom I love. I have a great team. But this is your business. And if you're going through something and something doesn't feel right with this candidate, whether it came organically or with, through a broker network, do not be afraid to say no. I have said this so many times to emerging brands, and it's very hard to hear because you're starting up and there's that check and there's that person opening their wallet, take my money, please, please take my money, I want to come on board, and everything about you is saying, no, and you do it anyway, right? Now, that's a 10-year commitment. I'm not saying you can't get out of it, but man, that's going to bite you. You got to trust your gut to say no early on. And the best way to do that with a broker, I think Aaron mentioned it, or I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly because they're all elite and brilliant, but is if you feel that with the broker, say it early on, because don't be afraid. Yes, it's hard. Rip that Band-Aid right off. You know what I mean? Because they're not going to be happy. And if you keep taking it down, the broker's going to think this is moving forward, right? Now, what can happen if you break it early enough? It's not right. The broker's going to take that person back. They're going to get that person back and put them into another brand, and we all live happily ever after, right? But if you wait, that candidate is going to feel like franchising sucks. All right, they broke my dreams and they broke my heart. Right? So this is where the radical transparency comes up, right? And where we can all win for franchising. So that's one of my tips. My second tip is that whenever I say this, once again, I see the horror faces, but I'm Jersey, I don't care. When you have a deal made with a broker, get that paid like as if your kid is going to be kidnapped if you don't pay that broker, especially at the beginning. Always, but especially at the beginning, because they all talk, right? And if you pay, we have, I swear to God, we have a brand that wires the money like before we know that they've made the placement. Okay, and we're always like, my accountant goes crazy, like, what is this? I'm like, I don't know, but I have a feeling I know who it is. So paying that, they make their living. They pay their mortgages and feed their kids based on this. This is how it works, right? So make the payment, understand things, don't drag it out, right? And thank them, because they will thank you. My hashtag is changing lives on social media, and that honestly is what I think franchising is about. And my marketing team goes crazy because I forget to do hashtag FranServe, because I really do feel like it changes lives. It certainly has changed mine. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up, questions that you may have, and do not feel that there's any questions. That's dumb. That's why we're all here, and you can address the panel. Please.
How many of you are using internal FranDev in addition to brokers?
Okay, so the question was how many of the panelists are using internal FranDev as well as brokers, correct? Yes.
Yeah, I have a full staff dedicated to organic leads, driving organic leads, but they also work with the broker network. So it's a team that facilitates all of our domestic sales, both be it organic, referral, or broker.
Same, we do it internally as well.
Same with us. I think as you grow, that team can expand. Depending on where you are in your life cycle, that might be you. And quite frankly, the founder, CEO, at the first set, the set go, you're the best salesperson you have. So I think it's just leveraging and scaling as you grow. But I think there's always a team, and whether or not that's you or someone else, you'll have someone that's dedicated to FranDev internally.
We've outsourced that brand development. I handle some of the, late stage calls with the candidates, but all the the walking them through the cycle has been outsourced.
Other questions? Go ahead, sir. Can you just stand? It'll just help us all.
Sure.
Thank you.
Two parts about the fee structure, the brokers that you're working with, and the relationship between that and giving up royalties as well. So what kind of fees, like you all mentioned the franchise fees, you're giving up 100% of that, what is it costing you in addition to that? I'd love to just understand typical fee structures and royalties.
I would never, ever give away any royalties
Agree.
to anyone else.
Agree.
We don't take them.
And any broker who asks you for that, or an organization that asks you for that, I don't know. It infuriates me. You heard David talk about it yesterday. It cuts into your EBITDA like severely.
Most of the fees, so at least I can speak from my experience, so I'm going to talk to you about most of the fees in my world, right, is a percentage of the franchise fee. And that can be anywhere, the brand set that. Sometimes they'll come to us and ask it. We'll often say, talk to your attorney, talk to your accountant. A lot of times it's 50%, sometimes it's 30%. What my brokers look at is the same thing that I look at, because everybody always thinks, oh, they're going to go to the one that pays the most, right? So if I don't pay the most, I'm done. We really look at two things. One, percentage to what your total investment is. Like, in other words, we have people who pay 10 grand and they make sales, they do units like this because their cost to invest is not high, so it feels nice. If you're $1 million and you're paying out $3,000, yeah, my brokers are not running that. That doesn't feel comfortable to them. So yeah, I'm not going to deny some of that, but it's not really what your role, I have to pay, 75%. But the other thing is, do you close? Do you communicate? Because this is a relationship long-term business. So that one, that one award, that's not going to make or break them to love you. It's the ongoing relationship. So there's different fees, just to answer that, and then I will let you guys talk, because you'll probably know more than I do. I'm a product of my own company, right? I grew up in my own company. There's fees to come in, and they're all different, and Joan, my VP, can tell you, because I honestly don't know. I own the company, my team runs it. And so there's fees, and then for us, it's the big fee is what goes to my brokers, because they've earned it, right? So, and then of course coming to conventions or whatever, but that's optional for us. That's not mandatory. And gentlemen, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say it's a percentage of your initial franchise fee. It should never be the whole thing, but certainly a percentage, a healthy percentage at that. The brokers do their work; they deserve to get paid. Certainly not royalties. Just to echo Aaron and Neal. Yeah. And then I would just say that, yeah, I agree.
I think on average, before COVID, between 2015 and 2019, I did 90 broker deals. I think the average of the total IFF, and this is including an FSO, about 85 to 90% of the total franchise fee went to either the commissions for both, plus the fixed fee, the retainers, and the shows. So when you amortize that out across all the deals, it works out to be about 90%.
Yeah, I agree. 90%. That's what you can consider out the door. And the best advice I can give you is when you get that money, just pay it right away. Don't even let it hit the account. It makes you sad because you. Thank you. I'll take that. I was taught well by my FSO, but pay that right away, because when you see 100,000 come in, it can give you false security. 100,000 in, 90 out. You only got 10. There you go.
And you're going to get scared with the accounting rules. At the end of the year, when you see that accrued liability and how much you could have collected in franchise fees, I remember my first board meeting, a couple board members went, "What? We could have collected that on our own?" That's a bad assumption, because we wouldn't have gotten the units sold. But at the end of the day, it can still be a really big number, but you've got to rely back to what really creates accretive value and long-term value for your franchise, which is royalties, right? So
You can also work with the networks on structuring fees, especially on multi-unit, multi-brand deals.
Last question. All right, real quick. So you guys have to share the time. Real quick, go. I'm going to have two of you answer.
Yeah, as you're building out your pro forma, as we're thinking about working with an FSO, what are
I can't speak to it. I don't work with an FSO. So.
90% out the door on the franchise fees. That's how you roll it out.
Okay, and go ahead,
We
sir.
talked about a lot of later stage and the handoff from the brokers.
Well, it's a guide. It's a guided handoff. Yeah, we stay coaching through.
What about early stage, before that handoff and before the transition from the broker side?
Okay, so good question. What do we do, right, in essence, at the beginning, right? So brokers are vetting the candidates. We're finding out about financials. Are they looking to have nights and weekends? Do they want to have a big staff? Do they want to have a small staff? Do they like B2B? Do they want, we're kind of interviewing them, if you will, to find out what they want, and then we're matchmaking to what candidate would be best. If you think about a friend who sets up people on dating, and then you guys go on dates, then you get married. Well, we're the ones who set you up on a date, right? And then you guys decide if you want to get married, right? So we stay involved in the process because, as I said, it can pivot, right? Something happens, you don't like them, they don't like you, you find out they lied to us about money, they don't quite have as much liquid as they said they did. Nobody ever lies in that, right? But so that's kind of what we do. We net down. We're paid to eliminate and bring you people that can move forward if it all aligns, right? Okay, so I'm one of these people who start and end on time, right? So everybody in my staff knows that, man. If you're a minute late, we're already in the meeting, right? So I start and end on time. First of all, I'd love to have a big hand for my elite panel, please. And the last thing that I'm going to say is congratulations to all of you who are looking to jump into franchising or who already have. I'm on lots of boards and committees at the IFA, and I can tell you there has never been a better time to be involved in franchising. COVID, as horrible as it was, and you never want to profit for anything that's as destructive as that, but the desire for people to own their own business, to wake up, to not be, we call them corporate refugees, to get, the hell out of that environment has never been greater. So I'm going to give all of you guys, give yourself a round of applause for really taking that leap. And I gotta say it because everybody who knows me knows it, guys. Have a fantastic day. Thank you.